So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end, period Shiach the prophet, the 61st chapter. We find a layer of understanding related with the time of the restoration of the holy cities laid waste for many centuries. Those cities are the cities of the Messiah, and then also the Gentiles were included in the holy plan. So then we can understand during this time then the intricacies of the 11th chapter of Daniel related with the time of the restoration. So there are areas of the second chapter of Daniel related with the statue. Then you find the 11th chapter related in a specific understanding of the time of the restoration period, as it was then spoke before. And this then understanding requires then the 11th chapter, the relationship of the kingdom of the north and the kingdom of the south. There is a reason why there is then the bricks. So then we can become more familiar with it, because for the most part the central and northern part of Africa, sometimes they are not instructed properly. But then, since we understand the whole instructions related with primarily the bricks, there is a reason why you have then the kingdom of the north taking leadership of the bricks. There is a very specific reason, absolutely in line with the holy instructions. And these holy instructions were given more than 2,500 years ago. So then we must understand also there is a time limit related with the prophecy. When the Messiah was born in 4999, first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkah, would be equivalent of the mid-September. Then we understand he was placed on a pole 5032. He spent time with the Samaritans. Roughly the same year he was placed on a pole, 5032. He spent 2 Yom creation days with them, indicating 2,000 years of rulership of the Gentiles, as the Messiah then started his 1,000 years. So then when we read Galah, Galah is then the holy word of revelation. Comes from the holy word of the Hebrew, not Aramaic. When Mimel sometimes is then recorded, those are Aramaic, not Hebrew. So when the people they read Yod He Vav He, those characters are not Hebrew, they are Aramaic. The Hebrews then later they adopted the Aramaic writing because it was easier than to write. But those are Aramaic. So let's understand in the relationship of the kingdom of the north and the kingdom of the south. And before we start, then 2,000 years, as then Shimon said, each day 1,000, because they were related with Yom creation days. You find then 5032 plus 2,000 places us in 7032. We are in 71.3. So gives us roughly 20 years of time left of the prophecy. Then there are other layers related with the holy instructions, where firstly we must understand then the prophets of old, the prophets of Israel, the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage, and what they said in line with the holy instructions. So then we can maintain our schedule in line with the holy clock. We've got only roughly 20 years. During this time, then we studied Daniel. There is the first chapter of Daniel, introduction, where he came from. The second chapter was the dream of the king of Babylon. He saw the statue. Daniel then was a politician, tradesperson, and a diplomat. His function in the kingdom of Babylon and the other kingdoms, the Medo-Persian, was then to bring more trade to the kingdom. This was his function. But he also did understand tabernacling. So the second chapter is the dream. Third chapter is then mockery, because then the head of gold decided to make the entire statue of gold. Scoundrel. Then the fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on explains then the many metals related with the statue. Then you find silver, you find then bronze, you find then iron, and then the base of the statue, iron and clay. So then the iron and clay started when Rome was dismantled. Thus the legs of iron then gave way to iron and clay. Afterwards we find then a set time of 1,000 years of the Messiah, simultaneously with the understanding of the base of the statue. Tabernacling was then 1,000 years, and then the seat another 1,000 years. So when the Messiah was born, it was his 1,000. Then in 6009 we find the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the tomb for the first time. Cities were no more. The cities of the Messiah then were laid waste. Then 1,000 years of the seat until 7009. Then we've entered the time of the dragon. Then the extra 2 chapters of Daniel relates with the extras related with the Gentiles. You find many understandings there related with the Gentiles. And the 11th chapter gives us then precisely the time of the restoration of the holy cities period related with the Gentile level as the cities are rebuilt. However, the continuation of the period of time of iron and clay extends until after the dismantling of Rome. Then the 11th chapter relates precisely with our time, where then the cities of the Messiah are returning, and at the same time the Gentiles were then included in the plan, because Yeshayahu the prophet mentioned even the heathen would observe the mighty works of the Creator. So the Creator has provided a system of trade. But then in this sinful world, the dragon must be recognized, liking it or not. Either you understand tabernacling, holy area, where the set apart Hebrews are found. Those who are enlightened are found in the cities. Or the world is sinful. The dragon must be recognized. Why dragon? Because relates with precision. Then when we read a couple of chapters later, Bel and the Dragon, you find in the Apocrypha. Couple of chapters of Daniel. Then relates with the Balian system versus the dragon. The dragon is China. Because we must relate then the spiritual understanding of this time of the spirit movement related with the Gentile level. Because tabernacle never changed. What we are studying is the spiritual movements in the spirit world of Gentile level, where dragon comes first. So then we find the kingdom of the north is the Soviet Union. Why do we know the Soviet Union? Because they are in the northern part of the world. And the locking area is the 11th chapter itself. Because there was a time where 1,000 years was granted of the seat. Then you find the time of the restoration of the holy cities and then autumn feast. That's why when those people they have the false scripture, their minds are always in a spin. They can't understand what it means. Because the mind is not educated on the Holy Mikras. The Holy Mikras is the absolute certainty of the times and seasons. Once you stick in your cranium that there is a set time of the holy instructions via the Mikras or the holy feasts, then your mind locks on the time and the season. So the spring feast was completed. The Messiah completed spring feast. There are no Gospels. You find 4 records of the spring feast. Couple of them were from the set apart. Mitchiyahu was a Levite. Yohanan was a Shaliach. And couple of Gentiles. Those are the records of the spring feast. Then you find a period of time of roughly 100 years of transition from the first tabernacle service and the second tabernacle services. Then the real relationship of the holy cities and Gentiles. So what we should be studying is from after Yohanan until 1009 or then 6009. It has the most time neglected. People are always trying to find themselves during the time of the transition. But Gentiles don't fit. They only fit after the work of Yohanan. Why, for instance, the Asian market is so prosperous? Because of the holy cities. So then the 11th chapter relates then the kingdom of the north of the Soviet Union with the kingdom of the South Africa yet birthing. Africa is the kingdom of the south and must have a representative. As Babylon, the representative was the king. King of Babylon was representative. Then you find the Middle Persians. Then you find Alexander the Great. and then you find the Caesars. So you find the Chinese president, so you find the Kingdom of the North, Mr. Putin, and Kingdom of the South. Who would be the leader of the Kingdom of the South? Who is the person involved with the BRICS? Mr. Joseph Zuma. So what can we understand of these instructions? You find China the dragon, you find the rest of the world Balian system, besides tabernacling, where then the Balian system must be filtered. The Balian system can no longer deal with the dragon. Dragon is always precision. Has to be properly cleared and filtered before reaching the dragon. So you find the Soviet Union then being hired by the dragon as the manager. The Balian system must be filtered. So then you understand later the 11th chapter of Daniel, when it states, then coming with much equipment, and then the former would be restored, and then the later would be higher than the former. So the Soviet Union is the Kingdom of the North. Why Soviet Union? Because China is socialist. As the Northern Kingdom becomes their manager, they also become socialist. Then you find the relationship of Mr. Putin with Mr. Zuma. Mr. Zuma in turn represents the Southern Kingdom. That's why you have the BRICS. Because links the dragon with the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom via their own banking system. So liking it or not, Mr. Zuma became the representative of the entire continent of Africa as the Kingdom of the South. With it, unknowingly, he became the representative of it, and he's responsible for organizing the entire continent. Liking it or not. But then thus far we find then these instructions in its, in quote, baby steps. Though we are 40 years behind schedule. After 1609 or 2009, then we've entered the time of the dragon. So then the African continent must be reorganized by South Africa. Then we understand dragon, China, Mr. Xi. They don't play with the dragon anymore. Hire the services of the Kingdom of the North, Soviet Union. In turn, there is a relationship of Mr. Putin and Mr. Zuma. And lots of skirmishes. But then we understand the heavenly principles as far as the holy instructions. So then the leaders of the African continent, of those countries, they must understand the holy instruction. It is imperative. No place over there can run away from these instructions. Because there is not much time left. We have 20 years minus 1 time left. Considering the developments, consider the politics, consider then the raw materials, transportation, and the Messiah then is speaking later in the 8th chapter of the Freighters of the Earth, Then chapter 1:8 related precisely with the Messiah's viewpoint from heaven, from tabernacling, related with the time of the restoration. How do we understand this? What are the areas pertaining with the autumn feast? Only those chapters related with the sounding of the shofar and the cups. The rest of it doesn't belong there. You have post-autumn feast, you have a restoration period, and you have spring feast. The translators were ignorant. They didn't understand. They had a pile of Megillas in front of them. They kind of read through and they thought they were doing the best they could. So if the African continent expects some organization, it must be per instructions, or it doesn't work. So the first step is then the dragon making a deal with Northern Kingdom, giving them the title of management. This means every deal of production, new equipment, new technologies, you name it, must go through the Northern Kingdom first. Then it gets studied, then it's forwarded. Then the relationship of Mr. Putin and Mr. Zuma. Mr. Zuma takes on the responsibility of organizing the entire continent of Africa. Obviously, besides tabernacling. Tabernacling, he can't play with it. So, for instance, places of Congo, Rwanda, Nigeria, the entire area of Africa, they are solely dependent upon Mr. Zuma's leadership. Thus far, the instructions only give us the understanding of tabernacling itself and the holy cities returning for the preparation of the autumn feast. The Gentiles were included, but as per agenda. As far as what they do with the agenda is up to them. We have no instructions how to take them by the hand and teach them how to do the work. Because there's a lot of work in the hands of Mr. Zuma. He has to go through the entire rebel groups, armies, you name it. He has to come up with an idea. But as he understands the plan of heaven, then he has the backing from heaven. Then the people must be taught the principles of the holy instructions. It's a very rough sketch, but is enough to get the job done. Not only this, but because of this plan then comes, in quote, the engine of the future system. From the holy instructions we find only the kingdom of the east, kingdom of the north, and we find kingdom of the south. That's the engine of the system. Then comes the testing of this system. Not because the Creator did not know what he was doing. It's not the point. The point is making sure then the nations of Africa, and then the Northern Kingdom, and then the East, they understand each other. Then for a time, they related with their trade. Then the West must retrieve, because we don't find the West in the 11th chapter, neither a couple of chapters later. You don't find the West. The time of rebuilding. During this time of the restoration period, we find iron and clay. Iron is China, iron is Northern Kingdom, iron is the Southern Kingdom, the rest is clay. Then, as Africa then organizes itself via South Africa, via Mr. Zuma, there are other priorities. Panama Canal, and making then the South Pacific trading post. Very likely New Zealand. Because we are speaking of a system of the dragon. When it comes from China, Soviet Union, Africa, we are speaking of the system of the dragon. Balian system is not mixed with it. There is a person filtering the Balian system. After the filtering of the Balian system becomes dragon system. Then comes the South, then goes to Panama, then the South Pacific, then the regions of the Pacific. Lastly then would obviously be Europe and North America. Couple of question marks. Because we find then Germany leading a system that shouldn't exist. Daniel said that they would come together and try to adhere to each other as per the system of Babylon via Nimrod's idea, and obviously wouldn't work. The Eurozone is breaking. The North America is a disaster. There is absolutely nothing going on in our economy. Our politics is a circus. They are enjoying each other's incompetence. There is no production, no aim, no target. So then absolutely certainty. Expect the US monetary system if we don't do our homework. Then must be retrieved from the world's market. And it's already taking place. The investors of the Pacific, they are already warning. Many other investors around the world are warning the others to dump American stocks. Because people are watching very closely. From the 80s, from the gold standards of the 80s, the monetary system of US has declined 80%. And the money printing continues. Then 2 years ago, roughly, we find IMF report stating would last for maximum of 5 years. Then at the same time, the IMF report, then the Prime Minister of Israel mentioned the same time period. So you have confirmation from both sides. 2 years is already gone. We have 36 months to get our instant taxation system and retrieve from the world's market. The only way of compensating for this printing money festival is by having a system of instant taxation via the freighters. The U.S. government makes a deal with the freighters of our country, either via sea, air, or land, combination of every time there is a label printed, taxation must be gathered per box and taxed twice. First, because they get for cheap. Second, because it's retail. 90% is more than enough. Then the government can balance the budget and obviously revitalizing the industry, generating more electricity. So lots of layers at the same time. So then you understand when the Messiah said not a layer is going to be left undone. When the Messiah was explaining the holy instructions, he was explaining that there is a layer of understanding from this prophet from this time related with the holy Mikras. We are this time later with these other prophet from this time, later with these other prophet with this time. Those must be completed. When the Messiah was speaking of the end of the world, he was layering those understandings perfectly. And he said not a layer is going to be left undone. But then the adults were born during the time of the seat. It takes some time to get, the understanding of the layers, each of them. For instance, from Yeshayahu, you find Ezekiel, you find then the completion of the spring feast, you find sections of the area of the restoration period, then you find layers of the autumn feast. That's why then when Shaliach Shaul was explaining in Romans, renew your mind, because he was trying to say, learn the layers. When you learn the instructions, you lock your mind on the holy instructions via then the feasts. Then the rest of it is layering upon the times and seasons. Shaliach Shaul was sent into the Gentile world to rescue the set apart for service. Shaliach Shaul and Barnabas, they were not sent to the Gentiles. Do you want a proof of it? There is a section in the completion of the spring feast related with Shaliach Shaul many times, and he quoted the Messiah. And came a point where he was in a town and he said, to the set apart, those who were listening to the holy instructions. But as far as the times and the seasons, I don't have to speak with you of the times and seasons. If he was speaking with the Gentiles, should he not then explain it? So he was not speaking with the Gentiles. He was speaking with the set apart. Set apart means Hebrews. Those who would then later, during the time of Yohanan, form holy cities. Then it starts the relationship with the cities and Gentiles. But then most of the world got stuck in these 100 years of transitional time where Gentiles don't belong anywhere. There are a few remarks because some of the Gentiles got in a relationship family-wise with the set-apart, and Gentiles were kind of a mixed up. Then Shaliach Shaul had to come up with some remarks. Because the set-apart, because of their lineage, they were already functioning. 7 spirits of Elohim, 7 functions. But Gentiles are not part of it by nature. They have to learn the instructions, they have to learn the holy language, then they have to be invited. So when the Messiah said, those who come to me, they must recognize they can only reach the highest via the Messiah, meaning they are invited into the holy city. So the world then is ready for the relationship of Gentiles and the holy cities once again. Obviously. This is what Shaliach Shaul then taught his people and prepared them for. And they did until 1009 or 6009.